Meow, 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 meow. Okay, microphone's working. Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I'm going to be doing a response to a video that was recommended to me yesterday from a channel I'd never seen before called OtterlyNoah. Now, the subject of this video is why anti-woke people don't make good critics when it comes to media, and specifically animation. He had, I saw later, already made videos in this vein about critics of movies and critics of video games. And honestly, the topic itself wasn't what made me want to respond to this video. It was actually just the way the ideas were presented. I wasn't really paying that much attention to it to begin with because I'm just not really that interested in Western animation. I do notice some of the same critics and things like that because there is an overlap with, of course, anime, which is my niche. And I do tend to try and keep up to date with what people are talking about in terms of media criticism just in general anyway. But from quite early on in this video, there were some clips flashing up from ReZero, and that was enough to get my attention. Unfortunately, this is just not a good video. Whether you agree or disagree with his points and whether or not you like the people that he uses as examples, this video is all over the place, and the examples he's chosen are completely inappropriate for the points he's trying to make. Plus, he's completely misunderstood what at least two of the videos were actually about and what they were trying to do. He also claims in the title and in the beginning of the video that he's going to talk about what actually makes good criticism of media. And he doesn't really do that beyond a kind of surface level thing of saying you should talk about things like characterization and pacing, and then recommending some channels, which I just don't think really delivers on what he was claiming the video was going to be about. So I'm stealing Necro13 style for this one. It's not scripted, I'm just going to go through some sections of the video and give my responses on the fly. Now let's get into the video.
So, not too long ago, Disney ended up dropping the trailer for Zootopia 2, the long-awaited sequel to the 2016 animated film Zootopia. The original Zootopia was a huge critical hit and actually won Best Animated Feature the year it came out. It was also a very big commercial hit for Disney as well, since it made over $1 billion, so a sequel was inevitable. A lot of people have definitely been anticipating this sequel, and it looks pretty promising overall, especially based on the trailer, since there's new species like birds and reptiles being introduced. But unfortunately, it looks like a certain group of reviewers on both YouTube and other platforms have seen this trailer and aren't happy about it at all. I'm talking about none other than anti-woke animation critics who have seen this trailer and apparently think it's woke propaganda for some reason and are hoping it'll fail. Anti-woke animation critics are a pretty infamous group of reviewers on YouTube overall who often just get mad if an animated show has a person of color in it or something of a minority overall. If there's even the slightest amount of diversity in a product, they'll automatically call it woke propaganda and hope it'll fail. Rather than looking at an animated product critically and looking at the things you should look at when criticizing animation, such as storytelling, visuals, character development, pacing, and things like that, they'd rather get mad that Zootopia 2 happens to have a female rabbit in the lead role. Which is kinda weird they're just now getting mad at this because Zootopia 1 also had a female character in the lead role. Funny how that works, isn't it? So today I'll be taking a look at anti-woke animation criticism, why it's not real criticism, and what real animation criticism should look like overall.
Now, this is already quite strange because for the rest of the video, he is barely going to mention Zootopia 2 at all. He's not going to show any clips of anybody talking negatively about Zootopia 2 having a female main character. And honestly, I had a look because I don't know anything about Zootopia or Zootopia 2, but I looked up the trailer to see what people were saying about it, and I actually couldn't really find anybody saying what he's claiming, on YouTube at least. All the videos about the trailer were really reactions of people who were excited because they were looking forward to a sequel to Zootopia. And when it came to the characters, they were mostly talking about the new character who was teased, who is apparently a snake called Gary. I don't know, maybe OtterlyNoah saw some people talking about this stuff on a podcast, or he saw some tweets about it or something like that. I'm not saying nobody did react in the way he described, but it certainly wasn't a mainstream talking point on YouTube among anti-woke critics when this trailer was released. So really the video has absolutely nothing to do with Zootopia 2 or what people are saying about Zootopia 2, and it seems like he just sort of used that as a jumping off point to make the video somewhat topical, rather than because it really has anything to do with what he actually wants to talk about. Another thing you're not going to see in his video is him showing clips of people talking about how they dislike anything with any hint of diversity in it, or with a female lead. That's not what any of the clips he's going to be showing are talking about, but it is a common kind of straw man about what people think about the anti-woke critics in general. So he's presenting that as a fact that we can just take as read before going into the video itself. That the people he's shown in the opening of the video, including the very well-known anti-woke type commentators like The Critical Drinker and Nerdstalgic, and some less well-known people like Jester Bell, who we'll be getting to later in this video, that their idea of criticism is simply to be offended and cry that something is woke if there's a hint of diversity or a female lead. He doesn't need to actually prove this to support his point, it is that much of an accepted fact. But if we're going to think critically about critical analysis of movies and other media, in order to establish who is just a grifter rage baiting their audience into a fervour over the culture wars, and who is actually providing an analysis that has some value in terms of insights into the media they're talking about, then we need to think, do these people actually do that? Certainly some people do, and those kind of critics wouldn't really add any value beyond maybe entertainment for people who agree with their views. But do the best known anti-woke critics, which he's talking about here, actually do that? And I would say no, they don't. People who are aware of someone like The Critical Drinker because they find, the memes that you see often of him saying the message and talking about, say, Rachel Zegler all the time, may think that that's his view and what he has to offer as a critic. However, if you actually watch him, he does go deep into things like cinematography, pacing, writing, how well a movie is targeted towards the specific market that it's supposed to be targeted towards. All of the elements that OtterlyNoah is later going to be saying that critics should talk about when talking about media, he actually does talk about, and talks about from a position of some knowledge. He is a writer. He is also involved in making films now, I think. So while he does talk about things like trends that concern him in terms of the way that Hollywood is going or has gone, why he thinks that's a bad thing, and, the general anti-woke stuff. And he does have a kind of presentation style that is designed to be entertaining and comedic to people who have similar tastes to him, which makes sense, right? Because people choose the reviewers that they listen to based on them having similar tastes to them. He's not ever really just going, well, this movie is terrible because they made a woman the main character, or because it has a diverse cast. This is because I think he recognises a difference that a lot of people on the anti-woke side also recognise between things created with a diverse cast or a female lead because that's the story and that's the thing that they wanted to create, and things written with those things in mind and cast with those things in mind in order to meet DEI requirements for investment from things like BlackRock and Vanguard. And it's that mentality that they are anti, and that's what makes them anti-woke. This was something I was thinking about the other day when I was watching The Critical Drinker's review of the movie Ballerina, which is a spin-off from the John Wick movies and has a female lead. I'm a big fan of John Wick and I'm really looking forward to watching Ballerina, so I watched some spoiler-free reviews of it from different channels. Now, with Ballerina being a female-led spin-off from a male-led established franchise, you would think that if the anti-woke type reviewers really did just hate the idea of female characters being cast in leading roles, particularly in the action genre and particularly in franchises where male characters had previously been in the leading roles, then he would simply hate the mere concept of this movie and, have nothing but negative things to say about it on the basis that the main character just shouldn't be a woman. But what it actually ends up talking about quite a lot, as well as saying that the movie is pretty decent, is that Ballerina actually doesn't fall into the girl boss type tropes and problems that he would talk about with other things like Marvel shows. And he does go into detail about what those things are, and how Ballerina isn't that kind of movie, even though people might be expecting that it would be, on the basis that it is a female-led spin-off from a male-led franchise. He compares it to Furiosa, the female-led spin-off to the Mad Max franchise, and says that both of these movies, Ballerina and Furiosa, really are pretty good movies. The actresses in the lead roles, Ana de Armas and Charlize Theron, they, give good performances and are convincing as action stars. The characters aren't there to replace or supersede John Wick and Mad Max. They're there to expand on the universes of those characters and just give us new stories about what's going on in them. And while you can't expect the same box office success or, the same amount of love from the fans that you'd get from a mainline entry in a series when you're talking about spin-offs like this, these movies are worth a watch. He also talks about how audiences might be put off even giving them a chance on the basis that they've seen these kind of girl boss type movies so many times recently that they would be expecting that things like Ballerina and Furiosa would have all of those problems. So there is very clearly a distinction in his mind between a female-led action movie and a girl boss movie. And this is something that he and plenty of other people on the anti-woke side have talked about in great detail before when they talk about characters from the past in action movies that people absolutely love to this day, like Kill Bill, the Alien franchise, the Terminator franchise, Resident Evil, the old movies with Mila Jovovich, Underworld, Atomic Blonde. There are loads of them, and people who are critical of what they would call modern woke Hollywood really feel that there are restrictions on how women can be written, that people are so afraid that there's anything in what happens to a female character in a story that could be construed as her being rescued or not empowered in some way. And these preoccupations lead to bad characters that people just aren't interested in watching. Equally, they would put forward that this also affects how male characters are written, how any kind of dynamics between male and female characters are written. And that's the kind of stuff that Jester Bell is talking about in one of the videos that OtterlyNoah is going to be showing you in this video of his. And I would just say that whether you agree or not with these critics and with their perception of why things are done this way in Hollywood, or even if those things actually are happening in Hollywood, if you reduce their views down to just they don't like women in movies, or they don't think there should be diversity in the casts of movies because they're misogynists or bigots or whatever, and therefore they don't offer anything by way of actual media criticism, ironically, you're not thinking critically yourself about the content that they produce. Still, that was actually a bit of a long tangent I went off on there. The critical drinker isn't even a thing that he's going to talk about in this video. he was covered in his video about anti-woke film critics. But he flashed him up here, and I did just want to kind of give my thoughts on the generalizations he was making about anti-woke critics, given that's the subject of his video, and I don't think he really addresses his own statement there about how these people think before going into trying to show us why their critical work is bad. But the first big flaw we're going to encounter in the people that he does start to show us is that he's supposed to be talking about anti-woke animation critics, and the first person that he shows us is Matt Walsh. Certainly an anti-woke online personality, but definitely not someone who really pushes himself as a media critic. He will talk about media sometimes, and he will, of course, get involved whenever there's any kind of culture wars stuff, because his thing is being on one side of all of that. But even the people who absolutely love Matt Walsh, for whatever reason, aren't looking to him for insightful reviews of fiction and media. Just the same as people on the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of which online political side they're, heavily bedded into, surely don't watch Walsh for his excellent reviews and media coverage. I've actually done videos about both of them from the perspective of they absolutely don't know what they're talking about when it comes to things like anime, and they shouldn't really be taken seriously when they talk about them. I made those videos to make fun of them for talking about something that's just completely outside of their wheelhouse. Walsh for completely not understanding ReZero, and Matt Walsh for his boomer takes about how anime is demonic. But in both cases, they know they don't really know that much about what they're talking about. Matt Walsh knows he's giving you the boomer parent take of, animated movies are something you take your kids to in between having whatever rosy-cheeked, all-American fun playing catch in the yard he thinks people are having with their children all day. It's inconceivable to him that such a thing as the Sonic the Hedgehog community could exist, and yeah, you're gonna get those kind of normie takes from him. But people who push themselves as being animation critics or movie critics or whatever, they tend to be people who are very much embedded in things like fan communities and know what they're talking about and have some kind of knowledge about the industries that they're talking about, or at least a big passion for fictional media. And Matt Walsh isn't that, so why would you even think of him as an example of an animation critic? Still, aside from Matt Walsh not being a very good choice to try and make this point about anti-woke animation critics, given he isn't one and nobody looks to him to be one, OtterlyNoah breaks down one of his videos, which was about Disney villains, and somehow completely misses that it was all a joke. I thought I was going insane. I had to go and actually watch Matt Walsh's whole video just to check I wasn't going mad, and that it wasn't really obviously a joke, because OtterlyNoah goes through and argues very earnestly with every point that Matt Walsh is very clearly making ironically, and it's very strange to watch.
To start, let's look at one of the more notorious channels on YouTube that covers anti-woke criticism, that being Matt Walsh. Matt Walsh is a pretty notorious grifter on YouTube overall who tends to lean into a lot of anti-woke politics, but he also talks a lot about movies on occasion as well, including the time he made a quote-unquote review of Sonic 3, which just boiled down to him complaining that he had to go to the theater to see the film with his kids.
In fact, one person told me that my negative comments had upset, and I'm repeating this phrase verbatim, had upset the quote, Masonic community. This is a movie, like so many kids' movies these days, that schizophrenically darts back and forth from being ironic to painfully self-serious to goofy to earnest.
You are a sad, strange little man, and you have my pity.
Huh, wow, he sounds like a great dad. But Matt Walsh is also notorious for claiming that Disney is failing now because they've gotten too woke, clearly. Rather than choosing to look at Disney's films with any nuance and talking about what might be making them fail overall, such as storytelling, pacing, characterization, and the things that really matter when it comes to telling stories. However, he also is known for making the claim that apparently in his eyes, Disney has always been woke. And because of this, he actually made a video where he talks about all the different Disney villains that he thinks should be seen as good guys. Yes, you heard that right. Matt Walsh does have a video where he talks about many of the most iconic villains from Disney's 100-year history and talks about why they were right. No, I am not making this up. So let's take a look at Matt Walsh's defense of each Disney villain's evil plan and why they were quote-unquote right in his eyes.
The truth is that even older Disney movies have issues. The problem is that in those films, in many cases, the alleged villains are treated, I think, very unfairly. They get a bad rap. In many cases, they are misunderstood, misconstrued.
I only wanted to help!
Okay, so right off the bat, Matt Walsh shows Syndrome from The Incredibles as an example of a villain that he thinks shouldn't be seen as a villain. So, Syndrome, somebody that builds an entire army of robots to kill superheroes because he's jealous that he couldn't be seen as a superhero by his idol in his childhood, and ends up committing a mass genocide against most superheroes overall, should be seen as a hero. Are you really?
The thing with Syndrome is just Matt Walsh using that one clip of him saying, "I was only trying to help," to underline the kind of joke premise of his video about villains being misunderstood. He doesn't mention Syndrome at all or try and defend anything that he does in The Incredibles. He is not one of the 5 characters that Matt Walsh is going to talk about. So even though OtterlyNoah clearly doesn't get that this whole video is a joke, he's also latched onto the Syndrome thing and argues about it in that clip you just saw, and will argue about it again later in the video, even though Matt Walsh says absolutely nothing at all about Syndrome in his entire video. He's literally arguing with something he's just made up in his head and ascribed to the video that he's watched.
Are you sure about that one, Matt?
And look, maybe it's just my overabundance of empathy and compassion. You know, it gets me into a lot of trouble sometimes, and maybe that's what allows me to see it this way.
No, I think most people will tell you what Syndrome does in this film is just wrong. He goes and kills hundreds of people just because he's spiteful at them. There's not really an empathetic way to look at that.
You don't have to like Matt Walsh, you don't have to think that the jokes are funny, but you have to recognise that if Matt Walsh is saying that he has too much empathy and compassion and it gets him into trouble, and that's why he can empathise with characters like the villains he's going to talk about in the video, he is making a joke about how the people that oppose him on the woke side always talk about empathy and compassion and how they have it. How is anyone taking this literally? And it's not just OtterlyNoah himself. If you look at the comments, there are so many people acting as though Matt Walsh was seriously saying that he has so much empathy and compassion and that's why he can feel for the villains in Disney movies and for Syndrome, who he never talks about at all in the video. It's bizarre.
After this, Matt goes into another Disney villain that he thinks shouldn't be villainized, that being the hunters from Bambi.
We'll go through 5 movies. Number 1 is Bambi.
Wake up, we have company.
It's viewed as a classic because it happened to be released in the 40s, although it could have been released last year based on the fact that the villains in this movie are the hunters who shot Bambi's mom.
Okay, so what Matt is obviously trying to say here is that he thinks Bambi has a pro-vegetarian message, when in actuality it really doesn't. It just so happens that every single main character in this film is an animal. If every character in your film is a woodland animal, it would kind of make sense that a natural enemy would be the villain in the film, such as a hunter. I don't think Walt Disney had pro-vegetarianism in mind when making this film, so this just doesn't really make any sense.
Those hunters, I'm guessing, made some great venison steaks, maybe some deer jerky out of Bambi's mom, which is a fact that could have brought Bambi some comfort and solace if anyone had explained it to him, but they never did. Second, deer populations are out of control in this country. Like, they wreak havoc in ecosystems. They cause 1.5 million car crashes a year, including hundreds of fatalities. So deer hunters are performing a service, and yet they've been villainized in a movie that generations of bored children have been forced to watch. If Bambi's mom had not been shot and killed, she may have gone on to run into the road one night, causing a family returning home from dinner to veer off into a tree and die. Whole family.
Again, I think Matt is very much overthinking this and what the movie is trying to say. I don't think they were considering the overpopulation of deer and whether Bambi's mom would make a car crash or anything like that. I think they just wanted to tell a pretty simple, heartfelt story about woodland creatures. That's really all there is to it. But Matt appears to be extrapolating this and thinking Bambi is something that it...
No, Matt appears to be taking the piss by giving a really absurd reason why he thinks that the hunters were the villains in the first place, because it's obvious to everybody, including him, that the hunters are the villains because the movie is about a deer. Bambi, by the way, was based on a book written in the 1920s by an Austrian author and published in Germany. I only know this because I randomly found this book when I was about 8 or 9 and read it, just because it had the same name as a Disney movie, and it was really trippy. There's like a chapter in it that's these two leaves talking to each other about how they're dying because it's autumn. But yeah, neither the source material or the movie really was created with the intention of making any kind of commentary about vegetarianism or deer population in America. And that's why it's ironic to pretend that you think it does and pretend you think that the movie is vegetarian propaganda. That's the joke. But again, if you look at the comments section to OtterlyNoah's video, there are people saying, I can't believe Matt Walsh thinks that Bambi would be comforted by the thought that his mother had been turned into delicious jerky. He literally goes through all 5 of the characters that Matt Walsh talks about, and it's all the same stuff. Matt Walsh makes some absurd reason why he thinks that the villain was in the right and the movie was always woke. He's just as obviously taking the piss with every single one, and OtterlyNoah argues against the point that Matt made jokingly for every single one. So since this video is already getting pretty long, I'm going to skip the rest of the Matt Walsh section and go on to the next one, because it really is just more of the same with the Matt Walsh stuff, and you can of course watch OtterlyNoah's video if you want to see that. I can't really add any further commentary to it than, why do you keep arguing with jokes? Plus, the next one we're going to get into is one that is probably going to be the most interesting to my audience. And that's OtterlyNoah talking about why RevSaysDesu was wrong to say that ReZero was too woke, even though, once again, that is not what the video that he's going to use was saying at all.
But interestingly enough, it's not just American cartoons these grifters have gotten mad at, oh no. They've also tried to go and call anime woke as well, believe it or not. This has definitely seen a huge uptick in recent memory with the growth of these kinds of channels and also the growth of anime as a huge, massively popular art form. There's been things like people saying the Remna 1/2 remake is quote-unquote woke because of the fact that Akane says she hates men in the show.
How many times do I have to keep telling you that it doesn't matter because I hate men?
Which is funny, because if you look at the original show, she said the same exact thing there.
I really hate boys!
Funny that nobody called it woke then, huh? Probably one of the most notable examples of an anti-woke critic who often cracks down on anime and calls that woke is none other than RevSaysDesu, an anti-woke VTuber. Not too long ago, when the 3rd season of the acclaimed anime ReZero came out, he ended up doing a video on that and claiming that was woke too. Specifically, he found it woke due to some censorship that was found in the anime itself, so let's take a look at what he had to say.
Let's talk about the actual censorship, the real changes that are very observable with this 3rd season trailer. And it's pointed out by users like this saying, as the observant among light novel / web novel readers may have noticed, they have indeed censored both Capella's and Liliana's designs. Liliana's now features a sports bra and shorts rather than the skimpy bikini, and Capella's bra and bikini bottom also being made more modest. And here's a more up-close design of this third season trailer of the character Capella, and you can see they added a sports bra versus the bikini that she was wearing. Now, of course, this is a lolly character, so when people on Twitter see censorship of lolly characters, they cheer. And of course, as we always point out, that is a slippery slope, okay? When you start excusing censorship of things you personally don't like or find weird, it often continues until it starts censoring things that you do care about. It's a very slippery slope.
Because I'm pretty sure most people who like ReZero don't like it for lolly designs. That is such a weird and honestly kind of disturbing thing to single out about the show.
So this video that Rev made was a response to something that was a bit of a talking point in the ReZero fan community when the first trailers for Season 3 were released. It was noted by people who were familiar with the light novels that there were some changes to the designs of new characters Liliana and Capella. Now, the discussion around this wasn't really saying that it was necessarily a bad choice or that the designs were less appealing now that they've been changed to be slightly less kind of skimpy in their attire. I mean, we were also talking about another change that was noticed in that trailer, which was that Emilia's boobs had gotten bigger since Season 2 and in comparison to the light novel artwork. So the discussion around it really wasn't complaints based on the lollies being in less revealing clothes in the Season 3 trailer than they were in the light novels. It was more concern about why those character designs would have been changed and whether or not that was an indication that the studio responsible for the anime, White Fox, was going in a more westernized kind of censorious direction with the anime. Remember that at this point in time, nobody had seen all of Season 3, it hadn't been released. These were the first visuals we were getting for it. And remember too that Rev isn't really a reviewer. He's not really a critic. What he tends to concern himself with is news around the kind of media he talks about, which is predominantly anime and video games, and his commentary around that news. And his position is very much anti-censorship. There is quite a lot of overlap between people who are anti-woke and people who are anti-censorship, specifically pertaining to censorship of Japanese media in terms of what they do and don't like, but they're not the exact same thing. You could, for instance, take someone like Matt Walsh being very anti-woke, and I doubt very much that he would be particularly concerned with censorship of Japanese media when it's localized for the West. He would probably think that the things being censored were degenerate anyway and shouldn't really be things we'd want to watch. The anti-woke people tend to be more concerned with how different political viewpoints and ideologies are affecting the way stories are told and allowed to be told in Western media. Whereas the anti-censorship people, concerned mostly with Japanese media or other Asian media, tend to be of the mindset that that is already very prevalent in the West, not in the media that they like from Asia, and they don't want to see it starting to influence the decisions made when it comes to Asian media. They also don't like the idea that when things are localized for the West, they get kind of changed in ways that make them dissimilar to what was originally intended by the creators. And that's why you get sort of commentary on things like localizations and dubs, where new lines are added into anime. For instance, the very infamous Dragon Maid episode, something that Rev has talked about a lot, I've talked about a lot, and just about anybody in the anti-censorship kind of side of things has discussed. It's kind of a two-pronged thing. We dislike any changes being made for the purposes of making things more appropriate for Western audiences when they're localized from something made in Japan. And then there's also the concern that as the popularity of things like anime and Japanese games and visual novels, those kinds of things, grows in the West, we will see the Western kind of influence over the things that actually get made in Japan. And yeah, we can be a little bit paranoid about these things. When we see a trailer for something and a character's design has been changed to be maybe more in line with what a Western audience would want to see, we do kind of consider that that might be a sign that the production is being influenced by those kind of Western demands. This was all just speculation when this trailer first came out for ReZero Season 3, and none of it was really intended as a criticism of ReZero or of the upcoming Season 3 that nobody had seen. It wasn't even a criticism of the new designs. It was just speculation about how there could potentially be a case of some kind of influence that those of us who want to enjoy Japanese media as it was created, as it was intended, and without it in any way sort of pandering to the kind of things that we don't like in Western media, would see as concerning. And like Rev says here, it's really a case of it being a kind of slippery slope. If you're okay with them censoring one thing, then you can't be surprised later on when they start changing things that you didn't want them to change. So the position of anti-censorship people tends to be that Japanese media should be made however they want to make it in Japan, and when we get it in the West, we should just have the closest possible translation and all of the content that was included. If there are things in that piece of media that you don't particularly like say fan service or lolly characters, any of that stuff, then you just don't watch that particular series. You don't engage with that thing, rather than demanding that that be changed and censored, because if that's changed and censored, then you're opening it up to, well, maybe the things that you like, that you care about, will be influenced by the kind of Western standards that would have been imposed to censor those things in the first place. It's really like, just as we don't like it when they have to censor out a gay kiss in a movie in order to show it in China, we don't want the Japanese to feel that they have to censor things out of media that's perfectly fine to show in Japan to the people it's, aimed at, in order to appease people on the kind of, for want of a better word, woke side in the West. So all Rev's video is doing is bringing up the fact that there was this change, there was this conversation going on in the ReZero fan community on Twitter, and it was worth talking about and speculating on in terms of their anti-censorship position. But OtterlyNoah seems to have taken it as a review of ReZero Season 3, which, again, had not been seen by anyone, including Rev, at the time he made this video, and that he was saying ReZero was too woke, rather than giving any other kind of criticism of the series, thereby feeding into OtterlyNoah's overarching point that anti-woke animation critics aren't real critics.
I think most people who like ReZero just like it because it's a really unique isekai and has a really interesting protagonist too. Subaru Natsuki is honestly one of the most unique anime protagonists out there. He has an incredibly unique character arc too, starting off as a really selfish NET who ends up being transported into a isekai world, and because of this, he sees this as an easy avenue for him to try to get the life he thinks he deserves, since he never got that back on Earth. However, after living in this new fantasy world for not too long at all, and also dying multiple times over and over, he quickly finds out that's not the case here. And this really causes him to have to look at himself and just change who he is. Not try to change his environment around him or try to change the minds of people around him. It's incredibly deep storytelling like that and really great world building too that I think a lot of people like ReZero for, and also fan favorite characters like Rem, of course. Also, ReZero is one of the most faithful adaptations as well from its source material. So far, ReZero has not adapted all the light novels that it's based on yet, but for what it has adapted so far, it's honestly been really faithful to the source material. So, to be honest, I think that's really all people care about when it comes to an adaptation. They just want to see it faithfully retold.
And nobody wants to see it faithfully retold more than the people on the Twitter thread that Rev was commenting on. The fans of ReZero who've read the light novels and continue to read them because ReZero isn't actually finished yet, and who could tell you every single time the anime did deviate from the source material. Those were the people talking about the changes to the designs of Liliana and Capella. Nobody else would even know what they'd looked like in the source material. And they were talking about those changes because they didn't want to see deviations from the source material, particularly if those deviations were made in order to, fulfill some kind of censorship criteria for the anime's popularity in the West. There would be no need for Rev to be talking about how great a protagonist Subaru is, or how good the world building is, or any of that stuff around ReZero that OtterlyNoah feels the need to point out here, because the people interested in this conversation about the trailer for Season 3 were already big fans of ReZero. They already think Subaru's a great protagonist. They already know all the world building. They already know that Rem wasn't going to be in Season 3 because they already know she's in a coma for the whole season. So they certainly weren't looking to it for their fan favourite character Rem. They were just having a discussion about the reasons why there had been some changes from the source material that they love for the anime that they really, really hoped they were also going to love. And that's all Rev was commenting on. So I just don't get why OtterlyNoah is painting this as a video about why ReZero is too woke and that makes it bad and people don't like it. And then talks about why people should like it and all those kinds of points. What does any of this have to do with anti-woke animation critics? In fact, if you look up any of the controversies around ReZero and people's critical analysis of that show, you'll find that the people with negative takes on it really were not on the anti-woke side, let's just say. Nobody has ever accused ReZero of being too woke, or at least not that I've seen, and I'm one of those ReZero fans that was actually following that Twitter conversation. So this entire segment of his video makes just as little sense to include as a means of making the point that anti-woke animation critics aren't real critics, as the section on Matt Walsh did. I'm going to skip to the next person he talks about that I want to cover in this video now, because the rest of this Rev section is really just him talking about ReZero Season 3 compared with Season 2 and his views on it all, which is fine but doesn't have anything to do with the point of his video, kind of like everything else he says in this video, to be honest. So I want to go ahead to the bit where he talks about Jester Bell.
You can't just look at a censored character design in Season 3, call it woke, and call it a day. That's not real criticism. But, believe it or not, it's not even just character designs that these people will call quote-unquote woke when it comes to animated media. They will also get upset and call it woke if they think a female character has taken too much of a center stage, or if they think a male character seems too wimpy or weak or depressed. To give a good example of both of these kinds of viewpoints, let's look at a video from the YouTuber Jester Bell, where she says, "Why are all men in movies weak, depressed clowns?" Inevitably, in this video, she discusses how she feels a character such as Peter B. Parker from the Spider-Verse films is a weak, depressed clown, at least in her point of view.
Peter B. Parker from the Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse movie. Now, in Into the Spider-Verse, Peter B. Parker follows the trope of depressed, broken man who needs to rise above and is encouraged to do so by his younger counterpart. So you see, you have a good storyline and a good arc here. And then there was what they did with Peter B. Parker in the follow-up movie. In Across the Spider-Verse, we don't get much of Peter B. Parker, but when he shows up, he's all of a sudden in this pink robe and bunny slippers, pink slippers, running around endangering his child, and it's all played up for laughs as Miles is getting chased by every person in this spider society. Peter B. Parker, is not taking it serious at all. He's very carefree about it, and he's just played up as a silly goof.
Huh, funny, it's almost like he's not driven by fear, like you just said. As Jester Bell stated here, in the first Spider-Verse film, Peter B. Parker is depressed. And he does feel like his life is going nowhere, and he's incredibly jaded on the world around him as a result. And it's Miles and meeting the other Spider-Men that actually makes him change his worldview. And it also makes him change as a person. He ends up taking life by the reins and not living in fear anymore. He ends up proposing to Mary Jane and they have a kid together. That's specifically reflected here in Across the Spider-Verse, showing him at probably his best that he's ever been in a long time. He's at a place in life now where he can finally just be happy. And that's a good thing. He's not really weak, depressed, or a clown here. I'm not really sure where you got that from. I would not say whatsoever that Peter B. Parker is played off for laughs in Across the Spider-Verse. He's just as much of a character as he was in the last film. So, no, in this case, Peter B. Parker is not a weak, depressed clown. There is no quote-unquote wokeness going on with his character at all.
Now, the reason that this bit about Jester Bell is interesting is because she's probably the only person he talks about in this video who actually is a critic. She isn't specifically an animation critic. In fact, most of what she talks about are movies, particularly superhero movies. In fact, the section he shows here is just a part of what she says about Peter B. Parker in Across the Spider-Verse, and what she says about that is just a very small part of a bigger video about how male characters who she feels should be a bit more assertive or show different qualities based on their pre-existing states tend to be written to be more subdued, often by making them more melancholic or depressed, or by making them less serious and playing them off as non-threatening comic relief type characters. But since all of the other examples she gives, which I would say were actually better at making the point that she's trying to make in her video, were not from animation, he wouldn't really be able to use them here, because he's talking about anti-woke animation critics, of course. Probably the clearest example of the point she's trying to make that she gives in this video is the one about Gladiator 2, and how the main character in that feels very much more subdued and melancholic than he should, given we keep being told by the story that he has the same fire as Maximus from the original Gladiator movie. Now with Peter B. Parker, she's saying that the arc he went through in the first movie was good. She agrees with OtterlyNoah on that. She's not saying it was bad that he started his arc as a depressed character. In fact, although her video is called "Why Are Male Characters Always Depressed or Clowns?", she's not really saying that it's a bad thing for them ever to be depressed or clowns. She's saying that she's noticed a trend that characters are written to have these traits which make them less threatening and can seem kind of emasculating, even when that doesn't fit where they are at the current point in the story. The part that he doesn't show of her talking about Peter B. Parker, she mentions a scene where Peter B. Parker is basically submissive and shut down for comic relief effect, in a scene where she would expect that as the more assertive character he has become through his arc in the first movie, he would be a little bit more assertive. Now, I'd say it's just a case of Peter B. Parker being kind of arced out. He goes through all the development that they wanted to show for him in the first movie, and so in the second movie, although he's still a part of things and he still needs to appear, he's not expected to be a focus of any particular development or growth. He's already had that. And it can be difficult to know quite what to do with characters like that. And in a series that does have a lot of comedy in it, making them a kind of goofy comic relief part of things isn't necessarily a particularly strange choice to make. Making him less assertive than he should be based on the arc that he's already been through does make him fit the criteria of what she's talking about, but it really isn't one of the stronger examples of the ones she gives. And that's fine, it's not the example that she's hanging her whole thesis on in this video. It's just the only one that OtterlyNoah can use because he's trying to talk about animation critics. But I really still just don't get why he felt that this video, or even this YouTuber, was an example of someone who is a critic saying something is just too woke and therefore bad, rather than giving any real criticism. She puts forward a thesis that there is a certain way of writing male characters that has become predominant in post-Me Too Hollywood. She gives examples of characters where she thinks this has happened, and talks about why she thinks that writing these characters this way made the stories or end products worse than they would have been if they'd felt that they could write the characters as more assertive or without these kind of neutering traits to make them less threatening. Yes, she is saying that in an effort to be woke and not offend anybody, certain characters have been written in a certain way that is inferior. So she is blaming wokeness for something that she doesn't like in Hollywood. But she's putting forward an idea she's thought a lot about and using examples that she thinks illustrate her point well, to give you something to think about to decide whether you agree with her or not. Whatever you may think about her premise, or whether or not you agree that wokeness is the reason why characters are written like this, or whether characters shouldn't be written like this, any of that stuff you can agree with or disagree with. But his point that we just shouldn't listen to these people who have anti-woke views because they don't put the effort into properly analysing what's going on with the story. They just say it's bad because it has a woman in it, or it's bad because it has a diverse cast. Nothing she's done in this video makes her seem like that kind of content creator at all. And she's not even particularly big or well known. Her channel's about the same size as mine, so she presumably does have an audience of people who like to hear what she has to say. But framing her alongside people you think are big grifters, you know, making as much money as they can by talking about the culture wars with no real substance behind what they're saying. How is she an example of any of that? And that's really as far as I'm going to go with OtterlyNoah's video. He does talk about some other stuff, and he does give some recommendations of channels he thinks are good at media criticism, none of which I've ever seen or heard of before, so I don't know whether they're good recommendations or not. But I will just say I think he's completely failed at making the point that he set out to make with this video. And it really just feels like someone going into looking at these content creators in completely bad faith and taking away completely different things from their videos to what they were actually saying or what they say on a regular basis. Clearly, he doesn't like the anti-woke side of the internet, and he's had some success making videos talking about that, this being the third one he's done. So I can see why he wanted to cover this topic, but he really needs to work on finding things that actually illustrate what he's trying to say. Or maybe he needs to actually think about his own views on these people, and maybe he is actually going into looking at critics with biases based on their political views rather than their knowledge or interest in the media they're talking about. But what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. As always, thank you so much to the people who've supported me recently on Ko-fi and on Patreon. It's making a huge difference. I'm still in a very bad financial situation, and your support has meant everything. I seriously can't express how grateful I am, And I do have some stuff in the works that I hope you'll like, which I'll be putting up on Ko-fi and Patreon soon, by way of more side story audiobooks for Mushoku Tensei. So if you want to help me out, then there is that benefit. Though you don't have to make a donation to get the audiobooks that are already on there and the new ones that I'll be adding. They're available to anybody just for visiting my Ko-fi page, just as a way of saying thanks. And there is a link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you also to those of you who like and subscribe. I'll have another video up for you very soon.